As the Catholic Diocese of Tyler, Texas celebrates its 30th anniversary, we'll talk with the Bishop of Tyler about the challenges and blessings that come with fostering the Catholic faith in Northeast Texas mission territory. So please stay with us. Thank you, and welcome. I'm Father Mitch. Welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all over the world. Before we get to our guest tonight, I want to mention that today is the feast of Saint Cecilia, who was a virgin and martyr in the 230s AD. The empire had a major change. Alexander Severus had been open to Christianity, and his cousin, I think, was Elagabalus, who was before him, was crazy, but he didn't want to do any persecuting. Things were calm. But when Severus was assassinated, the general who took over, Maximinus Thrax, was a nasty, mean man, and he hated Christianity and began a serious persecution after he became emperor in the 235 or so. Among the martyrs was Saint Cecilia. She had already committed herself to be a virgin, and she was engaged to a man. She didn't want to marry, but parents made those arrangements in those days. And she said to him, an angel is protecting me from you so that you can't violate me. And so I can't see it. And I said, well, look, you get baptized by the Pope, and you'll be able to see the angel. Well, he got baptized, and he also could see, and he respected her vow of virginity, and was martyred before she was. And then she also was martyred for the faith. And she is one of the saints that gets included in the Roman canon, one of the women martyrs that we recall when we say the Roman canon. Oh, I should mention, she's also the patron saint of musicians. And we need lots and lots of good Catholic musicians to really give praise to God and not to the congregation. All right, we want to introduce our guest tonight. He was born and raised in Texas, and he was ordained a Catholic priest there and helped to establish the newly created Diocese of Tyler, Texas, which is in the northeast corner. If you know where Texarkana is, that would be even farther northeast of Tyler. And 30 years ago, they made that diocese, not too long after he was ordained. And he assisted with and planned for the consecration of the first bishop, Bishop Charles Herzig. And 25 years later, in 2012, he was appointed the fourth bishop of the Diocese of Tyler by Pope Benedict XVI. So please welcome Bishop Joseph Strickland. Bishop, welcome. Good to be here. It is good to have you here. You were originally born in Fredericksburg.
Fredericksburg, yes.
Yeah, which is down farther south, but your family moved to Atlanta, Texas.
Yes, 1963, June of 63.
Oh, it's just when I was graduating high school, or grammar school. And you grew up in East Texas, and at the time, it was still part of the Diocese of Dallas, was it not?
Correct.
Yeah. When did they start making that transition to have a new diocese?
Well, there was talk about it when I was in the seminary. I went in the seminary in 1977, was ordained in 85. I'd say probably around 1983 or so, I started to hear people saying, well, they might make a diocese in East Texas. They didn't know if it'd be called Tyler or Longview. That's another town close by.
Right.
But And frankly, I always thought, oh, they won't do that. I mean, that was my opinion.
Yeah. Well, so much for your opinion. Apparently, it didn't have much influence on Pope St. John Paul.
No, he knew the Holy Spirit had a different plan. So.
And they took a little bit of the Diocese of Houston.
Yes.
And most of it was in Beaumont, but the bulk of it was from Dallas.
All the way up to Oklahoma and over to Louisiana, the sort of the very northern corner of Texas there, northeast Texas, was all Dallas.
Yes.
And then one county south of Tyler was the Diocese of Beaumont. Jacksonville was in Beaumont Diocese, which is now part of the Diocese of Tyler.
Yeah. Now, it is a different kind of area and different culture from Dallas itself. Dallas is very big, urban, and that's there's about 5 million people in the Dallas area. So it's very urban, very mixed. Not so much some ethnic mixed, but lots of folks from the north have moved into the Dallas area, and parts of Dallas, like North Dallas, is 40% Catholic.
Yes.
That's not the case in Tyler, is it?
No, we started out probably about 3 to 5% Catholic, and after significant growth, some areas we'd be close to 10% Catholic, others about 8, and then still some areas about 3 or 5. We've had a lot of growth in the Hispanic community. About probably 50% of the diocese would be at least Hispanic in origin that have moved in through those 30 years.
And because a lot of folks don't know Texas that well, Texas does have a lot of different regions that are different. So you go to Fort Worth and you're starting to move to what's the old West.
Yeah, they say that's where the West begins, is Fort Worth.
Whereas Tyler is closer in culture to the Old South.
Yes, yeah.
That would be, it was settled by people from Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, and all those areas. So it has more of a religious and cultural sense of the Southeast, though it's Texas is still influenced by. What kind of challenges does that make for Catholics?
Well, a lot of challenges. I think it's changed over the years, especially since the diocese was formed. I think it was a real, truly the right thing and a real blessing for the church in East Texas, because it's still, still the minority. But what I've seen is Catholicism has an impact beyond its numbers there in East Texas. For one thing, we're unusual. We're not part of the, East Texas is very Christian, very evangelical Christian. Southern Baptist would be a very strong part of East Texas. There are a lot of smaller churches that, there's a lot of misinformation about the Catholic Church, and I think I've seen that change as well. There's more of a warmer, I think, more relaxed attitude toward the church than even prior to my growing up, but even glimpses of it there with a real antagonism toward the church, or a real cold shoulder, you might say. That's warmed up a lot with, frankly, there are many that would still say, you're Catholic. Well, I'm Christian.
Right.
And it's like there's a dichotomy there that a lot of people say, oh, Catholics aren't Christian.
Right.
But I think that's beginning to break down for various reasons.
Isn't one of the reasons I've seen in a number of places is that Catholics and Protestants have cooperated quite well on issues of life.
Yes.
And that's been where, in some ways, we have a tradition of moral theology to help us think through and give vocabulary, words for that. And that is a help for a lot of evangelicals, and they appreciate the cooperation. Does that fit into Tyler?
Absolutely. The evangelical Christians are very, with the moral teachings of Catholicism, they pretty much line up almost exactly. the mainline churches, as they're called, tend to have sort of drifted away from the doctrines that the church holds. But it makes it for an interesting sort of mix, because the evangelicals, even though they're totally non-liturgical and don't understand a lot about the church, as far as the moral teachings that say, abortion's wrong, all those issues of life, of sexual morality, it's like we're all lined up there. Yes. But in a lot of other ways, they don't understand Catholics. So it's an interesting sort of mix of teachings that resonate with each other, and then a lot of still misunderstanding, or especially like the liturgical, not understanding the Mass. That approach to sacraments is not there. They
wouldn't have much sacramental, and if anything, the tension among evangelicals is that there would be some who think that even the Baptists are too structured. So you have like the cowboy church movement. Yeah. I don't know if a lot of our northern friends know what a cowboy church is. Do you have any insights on that?
Well,
to show how they think that the Baptists might as well be like Catholics.
Well, as you say that, what comes to mind, and there are churches in East Texas and probably other areas as well, but that actually have the name Free Will Baptist.
Right.
And I think that the cowboy church is sort of an outgrowth of that attitude. It's like, I'm going to read the Bible and decide for myself, and nobody's going to decide for me. And that it's that sort of rugged individualism expressed in Christianity. I think that's what the cowboy church is.
They also have a lot of fun. They bring their horses to church, and they go for rides after the service. That part of the service is going on a horseback ride.
And great music, and
so long as you like country. If you like opera, it's not the place for you. But if you like country, that's a good country style hymns. But it's so there's some tensions among the evangelicals, but overall, the moral stances are where we're seeing a lot more dialogue and mutual support.
Yeah, and especially in the 30 years, 1987, the diocese came into existence, and sadly, the world has eroded a lot of those basic moral teachings. I mean, things are being accepted now that wouldn't have been dreamt of when the diocese was formed.
That's right.
And so in those areas, it's an opportunity for people of faith to really support each other in those basic moral teachings that are just falling by the wayside in so many parts of the country, so many parts of the world.
That's I'd say that would be very much the case there. And one of the other things, because you and I have actually been doing a lot of work and dialogue together over the last year now.
Yeah.
And one of the areas is in working on catechesis and evangelization in the diocese for the Catholics.
Yes.
First of all, what is the situation in terms of catechesis and among especially younger Catholics? What do they understand? What difficulties do you see for their catechesis?
Well, I can really speak from my own experience and growing up there. I've just turned 59 years old, so I was smack in the middle of the post-conciliar world that was quite effective there in East Texas and rural areas where we had a lot of missionary churches. I grew up in a Glen Mary mission that was part of the Diocese of Dallas. But the emphasis or lack of emphasis on teaching doctrine, I think, has had a very significant impact on our area because we are so minority Catholic, and we couldn't sort of coast on what the church had already delivered. We didn't have that. And so I think the people in East Texas, frankly, a good percentage of the Catholics have moved in, as you were mentioning, Dallas. they've moved in. It's still very rural, but people retired to East Texas that did get more of an education, went to Catholic schools in the Northeast and all. But even there, of course, the whole thrust of the way catechesis happened was to de-emphasize doctrine and dogma and to just kind of create a warm community. I think that is highlighted in our area because, as I said, the foundation that other places have kind of coasted on because the doctrine had been firmly established, it really never was in our area, with the heavy influence of Protestant mindsets. And you know, if you look at the diocese still, 9 out of 10 of the people that you associate with, that you work with, the kids go to school with, the neighbors down the street, they're not Catholic. And so a lot of that, I guess there are many layers, as I would say, of a minimal understanding of the Catholic faith. And as I look at the diocese after 30 years, I think it's establishing a stronger knowledge of the faith and deepening that catechesis, which is essential in order to not just maintain the church, but to allow it to really flourish and grow, especially in the very secularized world that we're living in. If people don't really know why we believe what we believe as Catholics and what Catholic doctrine really is, I don't think they have much hope of kind of holding back that tidal wave of secularism and of just basically going, you know, kind of back to the cowboy church attitude that I'm just going to decide what's right and wrong, and it's all relative to me. That relativism is rampant everywhere, and I think we're especially vulnerable in our area because of that lack of basic foundation.
I certainly can recall a transition taking place around 1968. I was a catechist in my parish as a college freshman, and we were told, don't talk about the crucifixion. You can talk about the resurrection, but it's too upsetting to the children to talk about, and don't talk about doctrine. And when I was in the class, I can remember the students said, well, why don't you teach us about the doctrine? This isn't about the faith. I was doing what I was told, but I was told incorrectly, and I should have thought more for myself and taught the faith. They wanted it, and that was in not rural areas, just in the city of Chicago. But this was a national problem, and we have two generations that are poorly catechized, you know, that we're dealing with. That's why I like. Well, you're going to say something on that?
Yeah, we definitely. And I'm graduated from high school in '77, so. I was one of those kids receiving that sort of catechesis that you were being taught to offer, that, you know, sort of Catholic arts and crafts more than Catholic doctrine.
Yeah.
You know, go make this and love each other, but, you know, it wasn't about really learning, why do we do this at Mass? What do we believe the Eucharist is? I mean, all that kind of teaching was not what the focus was. And, you know, I think we're reaping what the church sowed in those years. The truth has always been there, and certainly many people have on their own studied it, and many of the converts, it's probably true everywhere, but I know in our area, converts speak of coming to the Catholic faith because of the Eucharist, because of the body and blood of Jesus Christ. They come to believe what Christ said, this bread is my body, this wine is my blood. They come to believe that, and that's what draws them to the Catholic Church. Even as many Catholics, cradle Catholics like myself, would have really never focused on it and just go to Mass because it was sort of their cultural thing to do in their family. But that's a very weak link to the Church that often disappears when, you know, someone comes along that they marry that's not Catholic, or job opportunities come up and they move somewhere and they aren't associated with the church any longer.
Or when they hear people in the culture mocking Catholic faith. It happens in music. Billy Joel made a song mocking Catholic girls for wanting to be chaste until marriage. And you see other mockeries of the faith in the media of all kinds. It's starting to sound very ironic that Hollywood did a bunch of movies about the priests who were not so chaste, and they focused on that. All of a sudden, that petard is starting to hoist some of them up too. Increasingly, so it
tends to happen.
Yeah, you got to be careful that you don't, point your finger at somebody, forgetting that there's three more pointing back at you, and we all have to watch for that. But I saw in myself as I started teaching high school in '72. Before you were still in grammar school, and I was still in the first semester, that mode of, well, we'll just try to have a good experience and all, and the students just rebelled. They didn't like it.
And it's just not enough to sustain you through life.
No, and it forced me to start teaching the faith more, and to do so. And I'll never forget a student saying, I was teaching in '77, and after we'd gone through the prayers of Mass, one of the students said, "Wow, I didn't know that these prayers were so deep and so rich." He'd been at Mass, never studied the Mass prayers.
Never really heard it.
That was one of the things too in talking to you about going to do confirmations. How some of you were asking kids questions. That's part of your job, isn't it?
Yeah.
To see if they're ready for confirmation. Yeah. And what were some of the responses?
I quoted
of the kids?
One that said, I asked, what happens to the bread and wine on the altar at Mass? What do we believe happens? The kid said, how should I know? And that illustrated to me, and this is a kid being confirmed.
Right.
And as a bishop, it made me really stop and think, should this young person be confirmed?
Should his catechist keep teaching?
Yeah. And it's, good people and a lot of hard work done but all, like I said, operating from a weak foundation, because that's where the church was. I mean, we became a diocese in 1987, just really as that was just beginning to turn around a bit. And certainly with the same Pope who established the diocese, St. John Paul II, the catechism comes out almost at the same time.
Yeah, just about 4 years later.
Yeah.
And the canon law code had come out just a few years before
83,
that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the work of John Paul II, as he established the diocese, in many ways, I think our area is a laboratory for where his real thrust for the church of taking us back to doctrine, establishing the catechism, this is what Catholics believe. And I think those tools, part of what I see as Bishop of the Diocese now is we've got to use those tools. One thing that I've said a lot in the diocese over the past year is, we've got the truth in big books on shelves, but we need to get it out of those books and into people's hearts and teach it more, because all of that truth is what makes life meaningful. It helps guide people away from the darkness they wander into with all the craziness that goes on. I mean, the opioid epidemic. I mean, that's just one.
Is that affecting the area of Tyler?
Everything that affects the world affects our area of East Texas. Maybe not in big numbers that make headlines, but people are being affected, and all of the drug culture is very much a part of East Texas. And part of that, you touched on the idea of it being more south than Texas, and that southern gentility is part of the diocese, which there's a tendency to think, oh, well, that doesn't happen in East Texas, and sadly we find out that it does. Just about every, sort of challenge that society faces, whether it's unwed pregnancy or drugs or the breakdown of the family. You just go down the list, and it's very much present in the Diocese of Tyler in East Texas.
See, that brings up another point, because at the time that the church, in around 68, I remember it very distinctly, as the church is making that decision to go for community and away from its teaching doctrine and the commandments, we also saw at the same time that the rest of American culture, as well as other countries, had gone for the sexual revolution and the drug revolution. Yeah. And these have become ever increasingly devastating. I oftentimes mention to our audience, 80 to 85% of all prison inmates are the children of unmarried parents. Not having a stable family is the best indicator that your kids won't finish school and that they will use drugs, they'll become unmarried parents, and they'll end up in jail. Number one indicator of those factors.
And interestingly, the state prison system, we have, I think, 37 different prisons in the Diocese of Tyler.
Right.
I mean, we've got
you have the largest number
prisons.
of prisons of any diocese in Texas. For the Texas penal system. So, this is the sex revolution and drug revolution are bringing death and destruction still. This is where I see what we're doing in Tyler and here and elsewhere. It's a real issue we must address for the sake of people's lives, not to mention their eternal, immortal souls.
Yeah. It's interesting. That's really been something that I've thought about a lot as bishop. Is, as you're saying, certainly, what's the church for? So for salvation. I mean, the church is the vehicle that we believe Christ established for everlasting life, to pull us from sin into the life of the Father and Spirit, and then into everlasting life. But the issues we're talking about is just basic human existence that the gospel teaches people that we've lost touch with just the basics of an understanding within the context of Christianity of who the human person is, what sexuality is about. The secular world is so far from all of that, it's undermining people's ability to just be human, much less fulfill that supernatural destiny that we believe we share. So it really is, it's a natural challenge initially to just get people back for families. I mean, the basic makeup of families, whether there's any faith going on or not, when a family is splintered, as they are right there in East Texas, then the ability for a man to be a man, a woman to be a woman, for young people to grow in the way they're supposed to, it all gets undermined. So,
and one of the things, especially this month of November, is a month that the church dedicates to praying for the dead, but also thinking about our own future life. I know that we're coming up soon to the Feast of Christ the King and the end of the church year, where we spend more time considering the passages on the end of the world and the final judgment, and having that sense that life is not just about what I acquire or accomplish in the few years I'm alive, but it's about the eternal life of my immortal soul. And that focusing on that is not about pie in the sky and the great by and by. It's helping me to orient myself towards that goal and live worthy of that goal of heaven or not. That's these bigger issues that affect the everyday issues.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is many of the saints are depicted with a skull, and you think, oh, how macabre, but it's really just facing reality. That is the end that we all face, and what we're called to is beyond that. But like heaven and hell are issues that everyone has to deal with, but in present secular society, it all just kind of gets ignored, and people just say, oh, Catholics, what are they talking about? But everybody has to face that, and the saints that are depicted with a skull are just contemplating that reality that we all need to be aware of. And like you said, in November, the Church liturgically reminds us that all of us are in a journey where we pass from this life, and we hope to join the saints in the next life. That's supposed to be our destiny.
We'll be dead a lot longer than we've been alive. That'll happen. So we should prepare for that. Mm-hmm. We're going to take a break, but we're going to come back in a couple minutes because I'd like to discuss with the bishop the concrete things that he is doing in his diocese to approach this catechesis. There's some great, exciting things happening in Tyler, so please stay with us. Thank you, and welcome back. We're talking with Bishop Joseph Strickland of the Diocese of Tyler, Texas. And Bishop Strickland also has a blog that you can go to and comment on. It is simply bishopstrickland.com. bishopstrickland.com. And I imagine you discuss a bunch of things on there, right?
Oh, yeah. Try to keep things updated.
Oh, good, good. Well, one of the things that you and I first met on, we started talking about, especially last spring, is this constitution on catechism and evangelization that has led to the foundation of an institute, the St. Philip, named after St. Philip the Deacon, Institute for Catechesis and Evangelization. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. And first of all, let's talk about that constitution. What do you see as the purpose of writing that kind of a constitution about the catechesis and evangelization of your diocese?
Well, I suppose it really flowed out of reflecting on the need for teaching, the need for people to know the truth. And the Constitution really developed from an understanding that I really see it as a roadmap of how do we, for the next 30 years of the diocese and beyond, how do we really tackle these issues? How do we catechize better than we have in the past, from what we were talking about earlier, the idea of that doctrine is not something to focus on. Instead, the Constitution is about how do we begin bringing that back in for marriage formation and forming strong families and establishing, for the sacramental preparation, a good matrix that the whole diocese can use and really get the word out to everyone. I guess the Constitution for me is really about taking the Catholics that are present in the diocese, the statistics say we're about 120,000 Catholics in the Diocese of Tyler, and to really bring up the level of understanding of faith and of doctrine so that then they can begin to share that with family, with neighbors, with anyone who we have, as is I think the reality of the nation, maybe the world, but we certainly are a reality in East Texas that we have at least as many fallen away Catholics in the diocese as we have practicing Catholics. Mm-hmm. I think the Constitution is a way of infusing the truth and the doctrine and strengthening our ability to get that message out. One of the things the Constitution talks about, and we're in the midst of trying to follow this roadmap, is a delivery system to really use today's technology that has developed so quickly, to use it as a tool to get that basic truth out. Mm-hmm. Like I said earlier, to get the truth off of or out of the big heavy books on shelves and get it out where it's something that young people, teenagers, young married couples, the whole family can use for their journey.
See, here in Alabama, what we say is you have to bring the hay down so the goats can get it.
Absolutely.
You know, make it understandable, and not just keep it up there for the thoroughbreds. You know, let everybody get a taste of that hay. Yeah. And it's important to do that, because when you learn to bring the hay down for the goats, you end up learning a lot more yourself.
Yeah, the hay gets richer.
Yes.
More deeper. Yeah.
Yep. And it's, I want to let people know that anybody can take a look at the Constitution.
Sure.
It's public information, and you can it's called the Constitution on Teaching. You can get it online, go on your computer, and it's, you go to Diocese of Tyler. Make that just one word, dioceseoftyler.org. And it's on the website. Anybody can read it and download it if they wish. You can highlight it and download it into your computer and take a look, because one of the things that you did in this is truly integrate the documents of Vatican II regarding the liturgy and the Constitution on the Church. And you pull that together with the other documents as well, so that this is a living out of what the Vatican documents actually said, and not some vague spirit of Vatican II, as some people like to call it.
Yeah, there are a lot of quotes of the documents and writings of different popes that really speak to exactly the reality we're facing of helping form the family in the truth and the message of the gospel. So it's exactly that the Constitution lays out the roadmap. The challenge is following that roadmap now for the life of the diocese.
And because you have to do almost everything in your diocese in Spanish and in English.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because some of the folks in your communication office and at the Institute, St. Philip Institute, have contacted me last month it was, and we did a series on what does it mean to be saved. Yeah. What's the Catholic doctrine? And I'd written a book on that, so I did videos for your diocese to teach on each part of the chapters of my book on salvation. They were going to translate the book into Spanish. I did the talks in English and then in Spanish, and then we'll have the book in Spanish, so that this is what we have to do in Tyler, Texas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so tell us more about the St. Philip Institute. What's your goal there?
Well, the St. Philip Institute is just beginning. We have an executive director, we have director of family life, and a young priest that has taken on director of faith formation. So we have a staff of 3 with an administrative assistant. Um,
and they're well trained.
Absolutely.
You know, they're very well trained. I know the director is
director has a doctorate
from Ave Maria University.
Correct.
And the young priest has just come back from studying Rome, just studying Scripture.
Yes, at the Biblicum in Rome. Very intelligent, very sharp young man from Fredericksburg, Texas. So a Texan, but
and I'm keeping on him with his Hebrew and Greek, making sure that he keeps up with that.
good.
No, he's very good. He's very good.
But
in
they're
his
really
languages.
working on beginning to follow this roadmap. And the way I see the Institute, and they're already doing an excellent job, it is exactly like you said, to deepen our understanding. I mean, the wealth of knowledge that the church has about the human person, about how God has created us, about just a wealth of topics. We need to bring everyone up in their level of that understanding. So that's where I see the Institute as having solid, excellent theology that then can not get watered down, but get translated in a sense, brought to people and helping them understand how this doctrine about salvation makes a difference in how I talk to my teenagers and how I deal with my boss and how we live our lives. And so the Institute, one of the challenges we face as a new diocese is we were cobbled together from, like we talked about earlier, 3 different dioceses that all had much larger metropolitan areas that they were a part of. We were always the rural stepchildren that were kind of left out of the picture.
Yeah, Beaumont itself is a decent-sized town.
Larger than Tyler. Yeah.
And Houston is huge.
Houston and
Dallas
are-
is huge.
Yeah.
So, you know, little country folks just got to fend for themselves again.
So it's an opportunity to bring that to the people the way they are and where they are. And the Institute, they've already done it. They're putting a lot of mileage on their cars because they've already done what we've called a blitz around the diocese, where someone from the Institute has already visited with all the parishes and all the priests, just really a listening session to see what is it people are looking for. And like you said earlier, you know, the students you had back in 1968 were saying, we're hungry for more. As people mature, they're facing, I mean, they were facing the same human challenges that people face today, that people faced 2,000 years ago. Those basic questions that come up in life, and they were looking for the tools. So I think there is a real hunger that we see in the people of looking for something that's meaty and truthful and not just sort of glossed over. And the Institute is really working at taking it out to the small communities, to the rural areas, working with the priest. One of the things that I'm emphasizing with the Institute in the old diocese is really, if we think about it, Catholicism is lived out in the parish setting.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, exactly.
A chancery or any sort of centralized office is only worth anything if it really is serving those places where people hopefully go to Mass every Sunday and get some sort of contact with what it means to them to be Catholic. And that's the whole idea of the Institute, is to nurture. We have 68 different missions and parishes around the Diocese of Tyler, and to get out to each of them. And that is the tone that I think has to be there for this real teaching mission to be successful, to bring that catechesis and evangelization, to get it out of some central hub and to get it out there to even the smallest area has people that are looking for that truth that the Catholic Church has ready to deliver. We just need to get it out there to them.
And again, this is an area of about 23,000 square miles.
Yeah.
That's
33 counties.
Yeah, and that's a lot of traveling around that they have to do. But it's what you say is important because it's easy for people who work in the diocesan offices to be like the sheriff of Nottingham inside a castle, Meanwhile, Robin Hood is running around the diocese, outside in the countryside, and with all the people.
Yeah.
And who is the Robin Hood? You know, you don't always know that he is taken from the rich and given to the poor. You know, there's some wolves out there as well as Robin Hood.
Yeah.
So you have to know, get the purpose of the diocesan office is not to be this castle stronghold to keep the sheriff of Nottingham and a few other people in there, but to get out there for the folks.
It's interesting for me because as we continue to focus on this teaching mission, we speak of hunger for people. And I think that in a very literal sense, probably you know as many as I do, and certainly it's prevalent in the Diocese of Tyler, people come to the Catholic Church and ultimately embrace Catholicism because they were hungry for the body and blood of Christ, the real presence.
Yep. Yep.
And to me, that is what I've said to the priests as I've continued to pray about and reflect. The body and blood of Christ is the epicenter of that teaching. I believe if we can teach people that we don't just believe this as Catholics, but this is the reality that is God's plan. When Christ said, I will be with you until the end of time, in my own prayer and in my study, it's becoming more and more clear to me, his body and blood, the Eucharist, is how he is present. As he promised he would be present till the end of the age in Matthew's gospel. And he is present. And as Catholics, I don't believe we delve we haven't mined the depths of that Eucharistic presence, that body and blood, real presence of Jesus Christ. If we can accomplish that mission of teaching people, this isn't just some idea the Catholics have, but this is God's plan for his people, then all the rest of the hunger for the truth that flows from Christ, I believe that is the seed that begins at happening. And so many people have embraced Catholicism because they were hungry for something, and they found that something in someone,
in Jesus
in the
Christ.
real presence, in the Eucharist, in bread that becomes his body and wine that becomes his blood. And as Catholics, the reverence for the Eucharist, it flows into why do we do Mass? And I loved what you said earlier. It's not about us. It's not about how greatly we were entertained. I mean, and so many times, I'm sure you've heard, and so many times people will leave the church and go to one of these cowboy churches or a place where a lot of good people that are looking for something, but they leave because they say, oh, I wasn't getting anything out of the Mass. And I think that is the fallacy that we have to help people understand. The Mass is not about getting something out of it. It's giving something in worship and in honor to God so that we can begin to understand who we are.
It gets us in that relationship with Jesus Christ that's a mutual relationship. And one of the things I loved in some of the concrete points of your Constitution is that you want to make sure that there's great teaching on the liturgy, but not liturgical teaching that is about, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. This is not just little decorations here and there to move around this, that, or the other thing, but it's first, we focus on Jesus Christ, meeting him in this holy sacrament, his body, blood, soul, and divinity, encountering the person of Christ, and then you can make sense of the rest of the Mass, and the catechesis of Mass is sensible in the context of what you're saying. It's the meeting with Jesus Christ that's central.
Yeah. So that believing in the real presence, and then where does that happen? At the Mass. It just keeps growing out of that. And that's where we're trying to start, is really with a better understanding. Because many of the people certainly in our diocese. Their family was Catholic, and they've stayed connected to the church because, Father's a nice guy and it's a pretty little building, but the depth of understanding that would people die for their faith, like we were talking about Saint Cecilia. Would people be martyrs? I believe some would. Some would have that kind of depth of faith. But that's what we really have to teach people, is this literally is something we should be willing to die for. And people all through the centuries have died for.
And the most martyrs have been in the last century.
Yeah.
The last 100 years has seen more martyrs than the previous 19 centuries. 40 million of the Catholic or Christian martyrs, also Protestants and Orthodox. 40 million of the Christian martyrs died in the last 100 years, only 35 million in the previous 1900. So this is very much a reality, as we see in the news and such. One other element that you concretely are focusing on in the Constitution is the marriage preparation, so that people also, like with the Eucharist, this is the body and blood of Christ, and not just about us. But one of the people you hired for your institute is going to focus on marriage and family training. This is a big issue for you as well, is it not?
Absolutely. And great efforts were made in the 30 years of the diocese to really help prepare people for marriage. Mm-hmm. One thing that as we try to deepen that and to go forward in a deeper way, what we're calling it is marriage formation.
Yes.
It's not just marriage preparation.
Right. That's right.
Because preparation sounds like, well, we got to do a few things and then we're done. Formation hopefully connotates more. This is a lifetime of deepening understanding of a mystery. And one of the things that they're already working on for the whole marriage formation program that we're developing is something, retreat days or weekends, if possible, that they're calling 3 to get married. Mm-hmm. To simply remind a man and a woman, and that's the only kind of marriage we got.
Yep.
Man and a woman, and Christ is there bringing them together. And
He's the center. That was Archbishop Sheen's book, right? Yeah, that 3 to get married. And that Jesus Christ must be the center of your marriage. And one of the other things too, because I've spoken to some of the folks at the Institute, that because we go through stages of development as adults, not just little kids, it's not as if once you go through adolescence, you're done going through stages. We go through stages of development, and marriages need to be helped through those stages as well. Good times and bad times, rough times, sickness, all that. And the church is there to help form people in that. This is key to me about what you're doing. Yeah,
we're trying to focus on marriage formation because where do families come from? Marriages, and that's where the broken families come from, is broken marriages. And part of what you're talking about as well is an emphasis that I think we have an idea that, catechesis stops or formation in the faith stops at a certain point. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that the Constitution touches on is what I call in the Constitution seasons of life, where every age has different challenges they're facing, whether it's a toddler that's just beginning to understand who they are and hopefully understand a God who created them, a loving God, and then teenagers, and then young marrieds, and then the older people that are facing challenges they've never faced before.
Getting closer to death.
The message of Christ is there for all of those seasons of life.
Well, you're a bishop of the Catholic Church. Do you know everything about the doctrine and history of the church?
Absolutely not. I was formed in those years when they weren't teaching it.
Well,
so
look,
I've got a lot to learn.
And I want to keep on learning myself because I sure don't know everything. I just keep on learning.
And that's the great thing. Our Catholic faith focuses on mystery. If we really understand those mysteries, we'll never fathom the depths of the mystery of Jesus Christ, but the more we can embrace that, the deeper we go into
and
the
the greater
wonder of
growth
his
we
life.
have. I want you to get a hold of Bishop Strickland's Constitution on Teaching. Go to the dioceseoftyler.org. That's one word, dioceseoftyler.org. And Bishop, if you join me in giving a blessing and wishing everybody a wonderful time of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving to God, not Turkey Day, but Thanksgiving to God Day. If you join me in blessing our audience, may Almighty God bless you and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Bishop, thank you very much for being with us, and we're able to bring the Bishop and all our other guests only because this network is brought to you by you. We thank you and give thanks to God for you supporting us all these years, and ask you to keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill, and we'll be able to pay our bills too. God bless you and thank you.